great presentation, and thank you to all the presenters, Nicola, Ben, and Anja. We'll now move on to Q&A. So questions have been coming through, and we'll welcome back the presenters onto the stage. And then we'll run through a couple of questions before we head on to the panel discussions for the day. So I'm just going to wait until my panelists join me. Hi, Anja. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Perfect. I'm just waiting for the other panelists. Okay, I think while we wait, maybe Anja, we can start off with yourself. Obviously, you just presented and shared your thoughts on both what's happening in European and emerging market context. But maybe we'll start off with one question that has come through in terms of how important will city development and planning be in helping to close East Africa's affordable housing gap? And do you have any tangible examples of how this has worked in other emerging markets?
Okay. I think one of the most important issues in order to make affordable housing working is to bring together the different stakeholders on the different levels of the project. Because it's still also in Africa and in other countries we're working, we see there's still a gap to connect like the local authorities with the private developers, with the housing buyers. So this is like a chain, which normally is treated like separately in different stages. So what we try to do, or what is our approach where we used to work normally, is to bring all these different stages together, and this also helps us to bring the different stakeholders together. So align the process from the very first moment with all the participants, let's say. And I think this is the only way to make affordable housing working. This is for us one of the most important issues, and this is why we also developed like this approach toward affordable housing, because otherwise time is not be able to manage, cost is not be able to manage, different interests are coming on the table, and this makes things so complicated.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's one of the biggest challenges that both the region and the continent is facing, now and it will be in the future, especially as we see more urbanization, etc. happening. Ben, welcome. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm going to go on to a question. I mean, I wanted to start off with asking Nicola, but I think she's still trying to get onto the platform. But essentially, how much can we read into the perspective of what we're seeing in other emerging markets like China, etc., that are starting to resume their economies, etc. So from a real estate perspective, I mean, what trends are we seeing there, whether it's Europe or China, and how much can we read into that in terms of basing our assumptions on the future and how Africa is going to recover? I mean, from your perspective, obviously you've got a keen eye on what's happening, whether it's the UK, China, etc. But how are you looking at that and seeing how it's going to take place from an Africa perspective?
Yeah, I think thanks very much for that, Gaffer. Interesting to note from your polls that which East African economy will recover quickest. 46% of people have voted Kenya. And I think I would agree with that, not least because one of my votes was in that 46%, and not least because this is where I'm based. I think that, President Museveni has done a fantastic job in Uganda of preventing casualties of COVID-19, if the numbers are to be believed. And there's no real reason to suspect that there's any reason not to believe them, but he's had 2 COVID deaths since the beginning of the outbreak, which is phenomenal and highly applaudable. However, the impact that extreme lockdown has had on his economy has been massive, and Uganda has been very, very hard hit. And going forwards, I think it'll take the Ugandan economy a long time to recover. And in your poll, Uganda just received 2%. 2 votes, of which East African economy will recover the quickest. And who's to say whether that's right or wrong? You can't put a price on one life. So it's a very, very difficult balance that these presidents, these governments are having to strike. And I wouldn't want to be in that position myself. But the decisions that the Kenyan government under Uhuru Kenyatta have meant that, yes, we have a relatively high number of casualties, but in the global context, it's still a tiny amount. I mean, that may change, obviously, but because of the relatively fluid approach that the Kenyan government has taken to locking down, there's been no lockdown in Kenya, simply containment, curfews, and other fairly non-draconian measures, has meant that people believe that the Kenyan economy will be the quickest in East Africa to recover. And that's not just your poll. I've been hearing that quite a lot and seeing it firsthand as well. Containment lockdowns in Africa, where you have a large percentage of the economy run by the informal sector, are incredibly painful. People start going hungry in a number of days. There is no furlough. There's no, fiscal help from the government, from the guys who are informal traders on the streets. And so it's really very difficult. But on the flip side of that is that informal sector recovers very quickly as well. So I think the short answer to your question is that I think Kenya will recover relatively quickly, and that the casualties that Kenya has seen are not dramatic to the point where we would criticize the government for the decisions that they've taken.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And Nicola, welcome. I think we just missed you at the beginning, so I'll just take a step back. I mean, one question that has come about and that we wanted to chat about is essentially from a China or other markets which are starting to reopen. How much can we read into their recovery, the European recovery, the recovery in Asia, etc.? How much can we read into those recoveries in trying to forecast where Africa might be, or the speed of the recovery in Africa?
Hello, let me first check whether you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, because I'm getting WhatsApps all over the place here. So that's good. So to answer your question, yes, I mean, listen, everybody's quite weary of calling the end of China's recovery. So they tend to surprise most of the time on the upside. There is some doubt on how an enormous economy consisting of over 1 billion people can produce a GDP number within such a short space after the end of a quarter. So, there's always a little bit of suspicion about China's GDP figures. But I have to say, in the first quarter, they reflected a fairly honest picture, a contraction of minus 6.8%. Now they've grown by over 3% in the second quarter. Most of their factories are open. They have eased restrictions quite significantly. They are allowing limited flights as far as international travel is concerned, and their ports are open. There are still delays at a lot of the ports in China, just because you've got, of course, now stricter health protocols. And I think you'll find that everywhere in South Africa and Europe and in Africa. This is the reality of COVID-19. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that unless you start to do it, you're not going to discover what might be causing the delays in the pipeline, and you're not going to find ways of getting over it. So in terms of China's recovery, I think it's very hopeful for Africa. Remember, it doesn't really matter what particular commodity you're talking about. The reality is that China consumes the bulk of it. So if China is starting to grow again, if China is reopening, that's very good for Africa. Because most African countries, less so in the East African region, but most African countries are commodity producing, exporting countries. So I think that from South Africa's perspective, we've seen incredible resilience in our exports. The rest of the economy is shot. We've gone to pot. And we've been really hit very hard by the lockdown we've had in South Africa, which has been uniquely strict. But we have definitely seen that exports, especially mining exports, have ramped up a lot quicker than we would have thought, even with COVID-19 related shutdowns and reopening and shutdowns and reopening. So if that is the case for us, it will definitely be the case for Tanzania. It will definitely be the case for other African exporting countries. So that's a big plus. And what I think it does is it essentially increases the chances that Africa might get through this crisis this unpredictable event, with a little bit more resilience than the rest of the world.
Sure. Yeah, just sticking on that, maybe on that note. I mean, from obviously one of the biggest drivers of investment at the moment is currency volatility and liquidity in these markets. I mean, what is your view or the house view in terms of the currency outlook for the Kenya shilling and some of the other currencies in East Africa?
All right, so this is a problem all over for Africa, because what has clearly happened with COVID-19, especially if you look at Kenya, a country that relies on tourism, as you have seen lockdown imposed across the world, travel restrictions imposed across the globe, unfortunately falling for Kenya almost simultaneously with, the main attractions, and you would expect Kenya to have normally benefited from the European summer or the Northern Hemisphere summer attracting tourism. In the process, now, of course, that has been hugely disrupted. And in the process, it, of course, means for most African countries that they're not earning the sort of revenue they would have had for tourism receipts, and therefore not getting the kind of foreign currency they would have had for tourism receipts. So we are dealing with liquidity issues across Africa. And I don't think that's avoidable. It is a problem. It's going to probably get a lot worse before it gets better for many African countries. The only sort of mitigating factor I can offer with regards to that is that our currencies will be under pressure, especially the less liquid currencies, as is the case in East Africa. And the only solution to get around this really is that it requires the authorities to, put in place some form of backstop, some form of bridging finance. And the positive in that regard is the IMF, the World Bank, all your international financial institutions are actually now a lot more open to providing short-term liquidity funding and liquidity facilities at far less conditionality than they had in the past. So that is the good news. There's also consideration being given to the notion of debt forgiveness. This will depend on whether a country actually qualifies for it or not. There are some countries in East Africa that might, but most countries in East Africa might not, given that they are fairly resilient and that within Africa, it's really been one of the performing regions. So I'm not sure that you would qualify, of course, but for the very vulnerable countries, there is that element to it. So perhaps for South Sudan, for countries like that, there is at least that mitigating factor that debt forgiveness or debt, certainly the delay of interest payments are being considered very strongly and actually being supported by the G20 countries.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I do think that East Africa, just by its nature, has been a bit more resilient than the rest of the continent. I think that will bode well for the currencies. And then just shifting gears, there's some questions around the technology being used. I think the question that we want to ask from an audience perspective is, what is the adoption of this technology in city planning and urban models, and are developers, city councils, are they becoming more willing to use these technologies, and how do you see that changing now, especially with everything that's transpired with the pandemic and so forth? I mean, do you see this being accelerated?
I didn't listen very well to you because it was a bit cut, but I hope I understood correctly. It's like the application of the software. Is this correct, of the technological tool?
Yes, so it's about the adoption, how quickly you think the adoption of technology in city planning and urban models will be, and what the uptake from city councils and developers will be. I mean, are they willing to adopt? Are you seeing a change in the way they interact with technology or build it into their businesses?
I mean, this technical tool we have been presenting today is a basic tool which can be very good use for city council or for the planning departments. This is a tool that we have been developed in-house, and we have been working with in the last 5-6 years already in all our projects, but is now in the market, and it's also available to work with. Is based on a solid urban model, let's say, what we have been explaining before, what I had been talking on the presentation, but it is adaptable to all the different cultural and environmental conditions. It's a very good tool on the first stage of taking decisions. This is something I always want to say. It's not a tool for detailed design or something like this the architects are talking about. It's more a management tool. It's a management tool in order to have fastly reliable output in terms of KPIs, social, functional, environmental, economical. And it's a tool that is good for decision making. It's a base for decision making. Based on these different scenarios, you are able to build up in a fast way, and you have valid data in order to take decisions. I mean, before, when you had been talking with urban planners or master plan or territory planning, everything was based on drawings. And maybe there were some extra sheets that people were doing numbers. But this is not valid anymore. You have to bring so different topics together that you're not only able to control it if you have a tool that helps you. So it's a decision-making tool, which helps also to bring on the table all the different stakeholders at the very first stage of the project. And this will help to make this project real. This is the idea behind this. It's not just a planning tool in the design, how it will look like, if there's a nice shape. This is not the aim behind. The aim behind is to have a tool to take decision at the very beginning, and will be helped to speed up also this process.
Perfect. Thanks. Ben, coming back to you, I think we had one of the questions has come through, but we had a webinar back in April, I think beginning of April. So I think the question is, has your outlook in terms of the impact of the pandemic on the real estate sector, as your thoughts in terms of how it will impact it going into the next 12 to 18 months, has that changed since April? And is it a positive change? Is it a negative change? What is your outlook going forward?
Yeah. Just before I answer that question, I said in my presentation that international flights are returning to Kenya on 1st of September. It's actually 1st of August, not 1st of September. Nikki was talking about tourism being one of the main forex earners for the region, and she's absolutely right. But I think one thing we need to remember about the East African countries is they're not single commodity economies like Angola, Nigeria being very oil dependent, and Zambia being copper dependent, for example. I mean, in Kenya, in addition to tourism, there is horticulture, flowers, tea, coffee, and of course diaspora remittances. Now, they've obviously been heavily impacted as well, but diaspora remittances are a strong source of hard currency income, which supports local currency in Kenya. And obviously, as people have reduced job security elsewhere, where they're working overseas, we've seen those fall, but they're already starting to rise again. So now, going back to your question about whether my outlook has changed, yes, it has, and it's becoming more positive. So there's quite a lot of feedback from one of the mics. I'm not sure which one it is. But yeah, I think we're starting to see the market open up already. As I said, the president has announced international flights will resume. Containment has been dropped from Nairobi, so the local tourism is already picking up as well. There have always been export flights going on throughout the time. Back in April, I didn't really know where we were going to be, and now we have a much clearer picture. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Our cases are still going up, but the number of fatalities seems to be under control. Nikki was saying about the recovery of the various markets around the world, we're starting to see people live with the reality, understand it, and carry on, not as normal, but as the new normal. And so, we are seeing transactions coming back in terms of properties being bought and sold. we are seeing the forecast that we see for the 2020 GDPs that are showing recovery pretty much everywhere, I've no reason to believe that they're not true. And I think that back in April it was very early days. We didn't really know what to expect. But now we are starting to be able to plan for what 2021 will look like, having made some pretty dramatic changes, not just to our business, but to the advice we're giving our clients in 2020. So to be honest with you, I think we're in relatively good shape to see a recovery in 2021.
Okay, great. I think we're running out of time. So I think we're going to end the Q&A here. But yeah, if there's any further questions from the audience, feel free to also engage with the panelists and the presenters directly. Anja, Ben, and Nicola, thank you so much for both your presentations and for the Q&A. They were very insightful. Yeah, thank you for your participation.